It's election time, so you know where we're going to be at Public Exposure. We're going to be with Joel Connelly of the SeattlePI.com and Mike Seeley of the Seattle Weekly right here telling us what's going to happen with the elections. Welcome, gentlemen. It's been too long a time since I've seen you.
Good evening.
Way too long.
So before we get to this year's election, let's talk a little bit about something from the past. A person who I greatly admired, even though I did not support, passed away recently, George McGovern. Joel, I think that you actually worked with him.
Yeah, in the 1972 campaign, this was one state that they thought they could carry. So we saw Lonesome George here 4 times, Eleanor McGovern with tears in her eyes watching her husband give a speech while at a fundraiser. At that time, with that type of culture, the fundraiser was up at the cafeteria of Blessed Sacrament Church, and you did not charge $5,000 to get your picture taken with him. And Sergeant Shriver, who was nicknamed Yo-Yo by the Secret Service, came here twice, once on a visit to the Pike Place Market when the engines and a couple of the brakes in one of the motorcade cars went out. So it was an interesting fall.
But Senator McGovern was painted as an extreme left-wing candidate, yet he was a military guy.
He was a B-25 Liberator pilot during World War II, won the Distinguished Service Cross for landing on the island of Vis in the Adriatic, and essentially piloted one of the hardest of all planes to fly over some of the most heavy flak, and came back from the experience of war being anti-war. It's one of those curious things in this country that some of our most battle-hardened intellectuals have never been near a battlefield. While at the same time, some of our more eloquent advocates of peace, the Episcopal Bishop Paul Moore, for instance, was a survivor of Guadalcanal. McGovern flew over Europe. You know, those who have experienced war tend to be a little bit wary about getting into it or predicting how it will turn out.
You know, interesting that you would say that, because that's exactly the way my dad felt. Someone who, and he had experienced war, and he spent 20 years in the military, and he was going to do anything that he possibly could that I never got to see it. So thank you to that generation, including those of Senator McGovern. Let's move on to this presidential election, however, and I've got to ask you this. What's happened? Why isn't this just a slam dunk for President Obama?
I personally never thought it would be a slam dunk, but the reason why it's a deuce right now instead of advantage Obama is because of that first debate and how ill-prepared Obama was for it, or how ill-engaged he was during it. He's performed respectably for sure in the next 2 debates, but Romney got a bounce and got legitimized by that first debate.
Well, I mean, aren't the debates just for show anyway?
No,
I think a lot of people who are not political junkies, people who have a life, tune into the debates, and sometimes that's where they get their impressions. And the impression of Romney was very, very different than the out-of-touch rich guy that had been poked at by the press. He came ready, and he also came ready to change the cloth of his conscience to fit the fashions of the electorate. Romney stands for one thing: election, and he assumed, as Obama has wonderfully said, that we would all catch Romnesia.
Well, it's October 25th as we record this show, and I think if you were to look at the polls, it's kind of a dead heat.
that's right. But just to expand upon something Joel was getting at, I believe with George W. Bush, that Romney wants to get elected more than he wants to be president. And that's sort of disconcerting. That I guess the difference is Romney, in my mind, isn't way out there. I actually think he's competent. He annoys the living heck out of me, as he does many Republicans, I should say. But
he's an equal opportunity annoyer.
That's right, and he'll say absolutely anything to get elected, which is a really dangerous device and a really formidable device in any sort of campaign or debate setting especially.
But at the same point in time, to an awful lot of people, President Obama has been a disappointment.
Well, you had those famous posters saying "hope" with the photo of Obama, and a large number of people invested their lives and gave a year of their lives to the campaign. It turns out that he's not a savior. That turning the United States around is kind of like turning an ocean liner around. That it takes a lot of time and a lot of space. And the other thing is that he's a rather cool and aloof chap. he is not the sort of person to directly engage, except when he has to.
Something that has really kind of bothered me and bothered several of us involved with the show during the campaign, and that is, it's about small business. It seems that there has been a lot of discussion about business with a big B, but very little about the primary driver of our economy, small business. Neither one of them seem to have touched it. Do they not have answers?
Well, Romney considers Bain Capital to have been a small business.
Yeah, but he's the only one.
Yeah, I know, and that's a big problem. So if you want to, you're right, it hasn't been talked about enough, but if you want to, show which candidate is more in touch with reality, that's the perfect anecdote. Bain Capital is not a small business.
Yeah.
Well, when he comes here, he's always coming here to raise money, of course. Obama has occasionally appeared with, let's see, there's a pizza shop owner from Stoneway North, there's a cupcake person, there are about 3 or 4 standard businesses that were saved by loans. I think Elliott Bay Book Company is one of them.
Grand Central, it always has to do with lunch.
Yeah, and he essentially appears with these people, but I get a feeling where Obama's concerned they're props. Clinton would have been, would have absorbed what they were about before he met them, would have absorbed more, and would have brought lessons from that human encounter back with him. But with Obama, a curious reluctance to do public events, a curious reluctance, at least in this region, which was pampered by Democratic presidents ranging from Roosevelt to Clinton, to engage the region.
All right, so let's say that Obama wins. He wins re-election. Is he going to change as president? Is he going to do some of the things because he doesn't have to run for re-election anymore that he talked about when he ran the first time?
I think he will come out of this with a kind of a certain macho aspect to him if he survives this, if he beats this. Remember, you had more than $1 billion thrown at this guy. You've had American Crossroads GPS, Americans for Prosperity, all of these corporate super PACs that are supposedly social welfare organizations, spending millions and millions and millions of dollars on TV ads. So if he manages to get through the toughest of pickup basketball game he's ever been at, with more flying elbows, I tend to think he's going to have to be proud.
I play basketball with Mormons, and that holds true for sure.
All right, well, let's say that Romney wins. Does he get a honeymoon?
Depends on how he wins, I'd say. Yeah, I think there's a bit of a honeymoon for Mitt Romney because, if he wins, he will have come so far within the course of a couple months when even his own party left him for dead.
First of all, the press will suddenly discover his virtues. Secondly, the Republicans tend to unite and hunker down when they lose. The Democrats get demoralized or all over the place, gazing at their navels and not ahead.
Well, let's go away from the presidential election for now. We will come back to a prediction, though, and we'll hold you to a prediction. And let's go to the Washington State governor's race. Rob McKenna and Jay Inslee. It's been a spirited campaign. Has it been a good campaign? Have the people learned anything about these candidates?
I think they have. I mean, I think when the campaign began, most pundits or people just, close observers of the race, Joel and I included, thought McKenna wouldn't coast, but would win, by a decent margin, kind of like we maybe suspected Obama would win by a good margin over Romney. Obviously, that hasn't played out. Jay Inslee has proven himself to be a formidable candidate, or at least one that doesn't make the mistakes that McKenna makes, or at least one that has a better personality than Rob McKenna. My best bellwether is my 91-year-old grandmother, who is as conservative as can be, will not vote for gay marriage, obviously won't vote to legalize marijuana, but is voting for Jay Inslee, just as she's voting for Mitt Romney, simply because she views him as a more trustworthy presence. So I think it's going to be down to the wire, narrow race, and I think Inslee might eke it out.
Is Mike right? Has Jay Inslee not made the mistakes that McKenna has made?
First of all, I think McKenna has very intelligently gone after those that Dwight Eisenhower might have described as those of the female persuasion. You've had an enormous gender gap here. The Democrats have won elections against a stationary target, Dina Rossi, 3 times by essentially claiming that the women of Washington would be left barefoot and pregnant if the Republicans won. With that being the case, so there's this frantic battle over this particular part of the electorate with both of the candidates dead even. What Inslee has done is essentially memorized a stump speech, retreated within that stump speech. Getting him out of the stump speech is about as easy as dislodging the Russians from Stalingrad in World War II. So he has proven to be a remarkable. I've never thought of Inslee. I've thought of the words Inslee and discipline being kind of an oxymoron, but he has been a disciplined candidate in staying on his message at all time and avoiding the situation where he has truly plumbed to the depth of how much he understands that message.
One of the difficult things, it seemed to me, for McKenna is that just about every day now, some Republican back east says something stupid. And McKenna may not necessarily have to defend it, but he still has an R by his name. How much of a factor is here in Washington State is it that McKenna is a Republican?
It's a bit of a factor for sure, but I do think for every stupid comment that's come out of the national wing of his party, he's a smart enough politician and he has a smart enough and moderate enough track record to blunt that. So I think when it comes to that race, it's the things he's done within the campaign that will either help him or hurt him. And I just think it's going to be an absolute nail-biter.
It's a little bit more significant, I think. There is always the factor of the Democratic vote coming home. And we're a lot more partisan here than we were when Booth Gardner was able to withstand the Reagan landslide or Dan Evans was able to withstand the Johnson landslide. We used to be, when I voted with my mother, I always compared it to the Hunt and Peck style of how people using a typewriter. She would go to one line and then the next line and then back to the other line. This was the habit in Washington State, but we've gotten a little more frozen in place in recent years.
So it's likely to be party line vote.
If Inslee wins, it will be essentially Democrats migrating home who flirted with voting for McKenna.
Well, let's talk about the Washington Attorney General then. Ferguson and Dunn. This has not been a friendly race at all, even though I thought that these guys were friends since they serve on the King County Council together.
I think Dunn is his last name in this race. I think, I felt early on he'd put up a better fight. I actually admired him a great deal for his stance on gay marriage, but do think that will cost him a great deal among his base. I think Ferguson's better prepared for the office and will win going away.
Nobody outworks Bob Ferguson.
And the fact that Reagan Dunn has his name and his mom, it's not going to help him enough, huh?
Outside people have taken over this race with a Republican group running nasty ads about Ferguson, the Democrats responding, and this sort of thing. They've been on the county council together. They don't like each other. Ferguson has laid the groundwork for this race for a very, very long time. I think on the down ballot races again, is this state more Democrat or more Republican? I think we're more Democrat, and I think Barry's going to take the presidential race by 9 or 10 points.
Whoa, we've already got that one.
That's good.
Here in the state, right?
Here in the state.
Yeah.
And if you, just one quick point, if you're a Democrat and you're looking to be contrarian at one point in your ballot, and I don't think most Democrats do more than that, you're probably either going to vote Rob McKenna or Bill Finkbeiner. You're not looking to Reagan Dunn for that contrarian vote.
Yeah, I don't have this one on the list, but it's Finkbeiner and Owen, right?
Yeah, and Owen, I think, has fatigued just about everyone in the state.
Really?
Unless you love his music. And how can you not, really? So.
All right, so we won't go there.
I mean, you need drugs after listening to his anti-drug songs.
That's a good point, 502. So.
All right, well, let's just go right to it then. Initiative 502, marijuana. Is this truly worth a ballot measure?
Well, I mean, personally, I don't feel like a lot of things are worth the ballot measure because I believe the legislature should do its job more often. But if ever something was, legalizing pot might be. So my answer would be yes in that case.
Well, but there's another point, and McKenna's actually has made this, is that, okay, so the state goes ahead and legalizes it, you still have the federal law, which makes it a crime.
The feds are clearly not going to get in the lead on this thing. Obama might lead from behind.
Under Obama, they would not. Still, there's a factor here, and it's also one that the U.S. Attorney cites, and that is that increasingly you have big business, big mob business controlling the marijuana trade. Since we're now paying a lot more attention to the U.S.-Canada border, it's essentially biker and Asian gangs that control the export of BC bud. The Mexican cartels are moving north. They have developed, instead of a cash trade, a barter trade, where meth and cocaine go north and BC bud comes south. So, and with this has come not a few murders, and has come strong arm tactics, big grow operations that do a lot of polluting damage and so on. One of the things in British Columbia that with BC bud trade and so on is so difficult is that many of the people in the judiciary and the political life are baby boomers whose association with marijuana was taking the Volkswagen van out to Pacific Rim National Park, with the guys or with the girlfriend when they were young. They don't realize how tough this is now, and the bullet heads.
Yeah, but that never gets old.
But the bullet heads who are running the anti-drug war, I think, are frankly overmatched.
Well, all right. So if it does get legalized here in this state, do we trade the mob for big pharmaceuticals, and which one's better?
I think the initiative aims at developing small business, small grow operations to state licensed stores selling a relatively small amount of the product to those over 21. It is a small business friendly initiative.
There we are. This is where Obama and Romney should be coming to Washington, legalized pot for small business. Got it. All right, let's talk about 1185, the latest of the Iman initiatives, which is the same one that he's done before, over and over and over, and it keeps getting passed, and the legislature keeps thumbing their nose at it. Is this one of those things where the people are finally going to say, okay, we're tired of passing this, or is it going to be the other way around?
A certain number of people have wised up. The Everett Herald with a very intelligent editorial saying that this has essentially become something that the Olympia lobbyists are now used to, and that's powerful special interests have adjusted to. So far from being a populist vehicle of controlling spending, it's a situation in which people use it in order to maintain their tax breaks. The Wenatchee World woke up. The Greater Seattle Chamber of Commerce woke up. The electorate, not yet.
So it's going to be passed again, and then the legislature is going to ignore it again. Is that it?
After a bit.
Okay. You with that?
It's the statewide version of the monorail, I guess you could say.
Okay. Charter schools. Pass, fail? Should it?
I believe it will and hope it fails. Personally, I'm not anti-charter schools, but I think a lot depends on the situation. And what a lot of people in Washington State, and especially Seattle, don't realize is our public schools, for whatever their flaws are very, very good when you look at them compared to the rest of the country. And charter schools, when you enact them and give them public money, tend to hurt the public school systems at large. And in certain desperate situations that makes sense. I do not think it makes sense here.
A lot of Democratic voters still undecided. A lot of billionaires' money going into persuading them. I would say that the odds favor its passage. Nonetheless, however, there have been 3 or 4 times in the state, this has been before the voters of the state, usually with an awful lot of high-tech money behind it. And the voters have said no.
Speaking of high-tech and education, there is an awful lot of talk right now, whether it's coming from Saul Kahn or whether it's on the front page or the cover of Time magazine, about or you just talk to many, many professors now. There is so much change in education coming that maybe this isn't the time for charter schools. Maybe the time is to take a bigger look at education and look at how online is something for all kids and not just college kids.
Well, one thing the Obama administration has done really well, although they haven't trumpeted it properly like a lot of their better initiatives, is did what you have just said, which is put schools on notice that, you have to innovate in order to be deemed successful by our administration, by federal standards. And you make a really good point in that if you introduce charter schools into the equation, when a lot of public schools are already doing what charter schools should be doing in terms of their specialization, then you might disrupt the flow.
True.
Same-sex marriage. In all seriousness, I look at this issue and I say, okay, what's the big deal? It should be a no-brainer. To me, it should pass because I frankly don't care, who marries who personally. But apparently, it's a bigger deal than that.
To me, it's a straight civil rights issue, and probably the civil rights issue of our time. And you know, who cares? I think is kind of the way to go if you're kind of ambivalent about it. You know, it's just legalizing gay marriage. Churches are still going to be able to decide whether they, you know, will perform these ceremonies or not. It will just be legal. There will be plenty of churches who do it.
And legalizing gay divorce.
That's true. Well, you know, they get to join the rest of us in that endeavor too. But to me, it's just, you know, gay partners now, even, you know, with domestic partnerships, are denied certain rights that married couples have in order to make decisions for their loved ones, to visit their loved ones. To me, it's just such a no-brainer. It's tough for me to really elaborate on it, frankly.
Is there a role for the state at all in marriage anymore?
I've always thought that the French do it very well by having you sign papers in a civil ceremony and then have a religious ceremony if you like.
That's a great point.
The famous picture of Mick Jagger going into a Catholic church to marry Bianca. But still, that we are talking about state-sanctioned civil marriage. You know, the Catholic Church does not have to perform them, and likely never will. The Episcopal Church at the moment is such that, you know, the joke is, how do you identify the blushing brides at St. Mark's Cathedral? Answer: 5 o'clock shadow. That already you have commitment ceremonies in many of the mainline churches, but the Catholic Church and parts of the Evangelical Church, the Assemblies of God, for instance, are adamantly opposed to this. They have a very skilled propagandist doing the advertising against it, who takes great liberties with the truth. So incidentally do some of the bishops. So it's going to be a tight race.
I think one point Joel just made about churches having the freedom to decide whether they want to perform these ceremonies, in a way it's about religious freedom. Currently, some churches don't have the religious freedom to perform marriage ceremonies for committed members of their churches.
Well, it does. At the beginning, when the laws were made, there was a reason, I think, to protect those who could not protect themselves, and that typically in any society is a woman. That's changed to a large extent now, and the need to protect children is the biggest thing, and gay marriage, or illegal or not, doesn't really have anything to do with that, does it?
And gay couples are bringing up children.
Yeah.
Again, part of the insidious argument against this, particularly out of Bishop Tyson over in Yakima, is that this is somehow a threat to children, rather than giving children the opportunity of good parenting, even if both of the good parents are of the same gender.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to something else. Let's go to Seattle Proposition 1, the seawall. Should we pay for that out of this type of money, or wasn't that the kind of thing that is necessary as a result of digging of the tunnel?
Of course, Seattle will approve this, like we approve just about every bond issue that is put before us. The voters are enormously generous when it comes to property taxes, and those who are renting far more generous than those who own homes when it comes to property taxes. So this will be said that this is absolutely necessary, and that floods and pestilence, fire ants, and swarms of Brazilian killer bees, and a disaster movie to rival a very bad one with Charlton Heston about Los Angeles Once Upon a Time will take place if we don't approve this. And I don't think they really need to rev that up too much in order to get the yes vote.
Can you top that one?
No way.
All right. Why aren't more elections interesting this year?
I actually think it's a pretty interesting year, to be honest with
Do
you.
you really?
I mean, Del Bene Coster is kind of fascinating to me. All the new...
How many times has Costa ran?
I think he's the Darcy Burner of Snohomish County.
Three times.
Oh, they both run 3 times.
Yeah. So, but granted, he's come a lot closer than Darcy. But that district they're in is so bizarre, stretching from Redmond to Point Roberts, which have nothing in common.
The other thing is, for instance, you go up to British Columbia. The provincial election campaign lasts for 29 days, or the Canadian federal election for 57 days. Here, this has been grinding on since early 2001 throughout the entire latter half of Obama's first term. Marilyn McKenna, the wife of the gubernatorial candidate, had a wonderful Facebook entry not long ago saying that after watching all the political commercials, people are going to welcome Cialis back on the air.
All right, so we've covered all of the elections that we're going to cover except for the predictions, and we'll get to those in a few minutes. Joe, you wrote a column recently, though, about is it time for councilmanic districts in Seattle? And I have to tell you that I like the fact that, that there are council members in other parts of the country who are protecting their districts. And yes, that may be balkanized, but I like that. I want my council member, but I don't have one.
And with 3 members of the staff, they can't very well do their constituent services. And so consequently, if you have something like a few blocks away from here where the city of Seattle was building potholes on 85th Street for 4 or 5 months or something like this, not too far from the mayor's Greenwood home, and something is inconveniencing or dangerous and so on, you can't turn to your council member. There's a famous Chicago power broker named Eddie Burke on the city council. He's the chairman of the finance committee. Mrs. Eddie is on the state Supreme Court. He's a national power broker. But at the same time, his ward and those bungalows are the root of his power, which means he can threaten, he can cajole, and so on the part of his constituents. And when he's done that, he goes off to exercising power and making money. But at the same time, the root of his power is the 14th Ward.
Is it time for councilmanic districts?
I actually think it is. You know, it's the third strike, I think, at least in my memory. But I think people are more likely to go for something like this when things aren't so peachy as they've been with the prior 2 attempts to get districts passed.
Yeah, I want to be able to complain to somebody about the pothole or about my school.
Exactly.
I want to be able to complain to somebody about my school that it's not safe around my neighborhood school. And I don't have anybody to complain to about that.
And if they faced about 85,000 voters instead of the full city, and they were accountable to those 85,000, less money, more influence in terms of, you know, hands-on being there, and more emphasis on actually solving neighborhood problems.
Who's going to lead the effort this time?
I think you got people all over the political spectrum.
All right. We have 30 seconds left, and we have 2 predictions. The first prediction is the governor's race. Who wins?
Inslee by a whisker.
No, McKenna by a whisker.
Oh, well, that was hard. Okay. Now we have 20 seconds left. We've got Obama and Romney. Who wins?
Go first.
A north-south split, Obama being up between 275 and 286 electoral votes, barely winning based on winning in the northern states.
Obama wins the Electoral College. Romney ekes out the popular vote.
Okay.
So Obama wins, but without the clear mandate.
Well, I would say that we'll find out soon, but we may not. There may be recount after recount after recount, huh?
Sometimes our turkeys of an election are not solved until just about Thanksgiving.
Joel and Mike, thank you very much. And that's been Public Exposure. We'll see you next week. Take care.